will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Hello and welcome to episode 31 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swadling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Mike, how are you doing?
Well, it's raining. We're finally allowed to do something, and it's raining. It's been sunny all spring. We're now moving into summer, and it's raining. It shouldn't come as a massive shock to a Brit that it's raining, but I just need to express that point. Yeah, all right. How about yourself, Dan? I don't often ask you how are you finding the progressing lockdown.
Yeah, I'm a bit miffed with the weather as well. Certainly, like you say, as soon as we're allowed out, it seems to have the weather seems to have gone against us. But I'm looking at what I can do with my wardrobe, and we'll perhaps discuss that a little bit later on. Now that I need to find something which goes with a suit, I think, which will perhaps cover my COVID beard. But we can perhaps discuss that in the fashion element of today's magazine show. What else have we got to discuss today?
Well, COVID-19 and some of the updates on public transport. The Taxpayers Alliance proposals for the post-COVID recovery. The protests in Hong Kong and what that means for the UK. Brexit and some updates on that. And some more things to do to stay busy.
Excellent. So yes, the lockdown continues, but there will be some easing. From now, 6 people can meet outside. If the weather permitting, obviously. And from Monday the 15th of June, non-essential shops are about to reopen. So that is some good news. However, from that same day, the 15th of June, face masks are going to be compulsory on all public transport in England. Mike, are you going to be popping along to a clothes shop to get the latest threads?
Apparently I'm going to have to. I don't own a car. Something that I might rectify if this continual attack on people using public transport carries on. I guess I'm going to have to. It's interesting the non-essential shops open on the 15th. I've noticed this past week a lot more shops locally to me have opened up. Now, I presume they were already essential shops that just chose to close down for a period, probably sensibly, but they're now opening again. So we're seeing things open up. The lockdown, the notion of lockdown has really disappeared in many ways. We've seen protests, we've seen people come across in dinghies, we've seen senior advisors to the Prime Minister driving all around the country. I don't think the notion of lockdown's very much there. I do struggle with the thought that a pandemic that really sort of first hit us in February, March time is now going to be is now meaning in June we have to wear face masks. What something about horses and after bolting and stable doors? Not sure.
Yeah. It is a peculiar one, this. When I think it was Grant Shapps who made the announcement that we would, if you wanted to go on the train or the tube or what have you, you would have to wear a face mask from that date. Well, okay, that's over a week away. So what you're supposed to do now, I don't know. But at the time, there was no particular evidence that face masks were particularly effective in terms of protecting either yourself or other people from contracting this disease. Although they perhaps knew something more, because a day later, the WHO, the World Health Organization, has issued new guidance suggesting that if you cannot socially distance in certain places, such as I suppose on packed public transport, then there is some evidence to suggest that these will be useful. Apart from the obviously civil liberties aspect of saying you must cover your face, I do worry about this, one other way, which is I think maybe the scientific evidence really isn't there. And I do wonder if maybe making sure that, and I don't know how they're going to make sure, but suggesting that they are going to make sure that people on public transport are going to wear these face masks. I wonder if it's a bit of a placebo, really, because I wonder if it's a way of trying to persuade more and more people to actually use the public transport to go back to work, because, it's okay to use the public transport and to go to work, having scared them to death with all the messages about having to stay home. What are your thoughts on that, Mike?
You could well be right. I do wonder if I'm not convinced that if you want to make me feel safe, getting onto a bus with a bunch of strangers, all of whom have got their faces covered, makes me feel safer and more likely to do it than not. I think it's generally less likely to make me do it. It'd be particularly weird in the summer, of course, that you will have lots of people with homemade face coverings like scarves. On the bus in their shorts and t-shirt, so which will be a particularly odd sight. And again, probably looking odd won't make me particularly want to get on the transport again. I do think there is a counter intuitive risk with this, which is a bit like where people wear helmets in motorcyclists and the helmets worn by NFL players. If you've got your face mask on, you think you're covered. And I've had it in the supermarket where people with their face masks are kind of almost pushing past me to get to the whatever it is that they want to get to in whilst out shopping. And it's because they've got their face mask, they've got their virus protection shield on. And of course, it provides some protection. It's not however magical. And I think you could see a counterfactor to it. So I just don't get it, and I do worry about the civil liberty element of this. There is an element of people in government feeling they can just tell us what to do without really needing to back it up, without really it making much logical sense, and that's a really, really worrying trend.
Yeah, I'll take your point on the public transport, and there's people with masks on, with face masks. It reminds me of those old westerns where the likes of Jesse James or whoever would rob a train. They'd always have some sort of face mask on, wouldn't they? So
yeah,
I don't know. I'm sure I've got a cowboy hat somewhere. I could do a little Jesse James impression on the train, see how I get on. But
there was an advert a few years ago, that was something about one of the things US soldiers know to do when they're in a foreign land is to take off their sunglasses when they talk to someone, so that people can see their face, they can see their true expressions. Although we're all getting used to Zoom, in fact, we're using Zoom rather than phone calls, we know it's much better to see people when you're talking to them. And we all know the limitation of these video conferencing products compared to meeting people face to face. Putting a barrier in talking to people isn't good for a safe society, a good society. And I just wonder that distancing, yes, it may save some COVID cases, and I understand why they're doing it from that perspective. But what Thomas Sowell refers to as stage one thinking, what's the stage two? What's the unintended consequence of that? People on buses, public transport, not trusting each other. People not feeling safe on public transport. There's a whole load of knock-off consequences there that I'm just don't strike me as being at any point considered.
No, and I think as well, if they can say to us, well, you need to wear masks on public transport because of this, how long is that going to last for? Are they going to have it in place for a while and then bring it back in the autumn just because, hey, there's some seasonal flu, whether or not it's COVID related or it's something else? Why not? If they think it works, well, I'm pretty certain that that other diseases do get passed on crowded tube trains and the like. Absolutely certain that happens when people are sneezing. So, why don't they do this every winter? I can see there are some people within government, if you like, who will think, oh, this is a good idea. Let's do this every year.
Public Health England will be clamouring, no doubt, for any opportunity to restrict our freedom of choice, because that's what they do. And if this is perceived to work, no doubt they will look to take the choice of what we wear when we go out of the house away from us, just like they've taken so many other choices.
Indeed. Well, hopefully this won't go on for too much longer. Time will tell. But the Taxpayers Alliance have recently issued some tax proposals for how the UK can come out of the COVID crisis and make a good recovery. Some of them are interesting, certainly. They're on about abolishing employer national insurance contributions, although they go on to say that there would be a temporary payroll tax for certain for people who, for the employers of people earning over a certain amount of money, and also they're gone about, and this one is particularly interesting, is abolishing employee national insurance contributions, but they describe it as having a basic rate surcharge of 10% on PAYE income tax, which to me just means merging most of income tax for workers and the current national insurance contributions. Mike, what do you think of those two?
I'm quite impressed with the ideas, and impressed firstly by the fact that someone's talking about getting out of this. We've just seen some of the job recovery figures in the US. Now, how Donald Trump's spoken about them perhaps might have been better, but we've just seen those figures. It does indicate a bit more of a V and a bit less of an L-shaped recovery happening in the US. We need people over here thinking about the same thing, thinking about how you get people back to work. I've always felt that employer national insurance is, although I'm a fan of no tax, is frankly morally wrong. The last thing you want to do is tax, i.e. disincentivize or punish someone for creating a job. I'm very pleased people have created jobs. It's, put a roof over my head and food on my table all my life that someone at some point has gone out there and created a job that I could fill. I don't think you should punish that person. Now, what they're talking about in terms of replacing some of the income makes sense. They're then talking about getting rid of these surcharge taxes and finding a way to lower the tax burden overall. A great idea. Anything that helps get people back to work is got to be a really, really positive thing.
Yeah, I've always thought that employer national insurance was somewhat bizarre. I think that in the past, like 100 years ago, when employers weren't also necessarily providing pensions to their staff, it was a way of and also people were working in factories and in more dangerous jobs, and jobs which would wear them out by the time they were in their late 50s, certainly. Then perhaps it was somewhat justified that the employers, the big businessmen, as some people would see them, who were exploiting these workers, that they were contributing towards such things as sickness benefits and obviously unemployment benefits and pensions and the like, but the state pension. And that was, of course, the idea of it. Of course, now it's just entirely a tax on jobs. And so really it should be gotten rid of, because as you say, Mike, it's something which, there's enough disincentives at the moment, not just with COVID, but just in general, for anybody to employ another person. So we really should be doing away with that. And I think the national insurance that employees pay, again, it really is sadly just another income tax. And so maybe it's better to just accept that. There was a time when, the idea was you were paying for your national insurance. You were paying towards if you needed to get unemployment benefit or something at some point, and indeed to your state pension. But with all the things they've brought in over the years, like pension credits and the way the new state pension works, it is just a tax on your income, or at least your income from employment anyway, not your income from the lands that you own and what have you. So perhaps it is time to do that. And one of the other proposals is to abolish capital gains tax, which would be somewhat interesting. But a good one, I think, is on corporation tax, where they're proposing to increase the annual investment allowance from £1 million, which I believe they're already going to be increasing it to, up to £5 million. Sounds like a good policy to me if it gets businesses investing in their staff and in their companies.
As much as I enjoy working with the Taxpayers Alliance, I'm slightly concerned they've not credited me, because this was in an article I wrote about options for a post-COVID recovery and tax changes they could make. And I'm positive that the boffins of the Taxpayers Alliance came straight to the Croydon Constitutionists and read that and got the idea. Maybe not. Yeah, no, that makes an awful lot of sense. Why would you want to disincentivize investment in your business that will create jobs, create products that consumers want to buy, and create value in this country? That's got to be a positive thing. Anything that makes it easier for employers to do that. Just coming back quickly on the national insurance stuff. At the end of the day, all taxes on employment is a form of income tax on you. You might not see it, but your employer looks at you and says, if I employ that person, I can make, and let's keep the numbers easy, 100 grand a year. And I want to make a profit on that. So I'll take 30, call it 40 grand a year of that as profit. So that leaves me 60 grand to play with. Now, in essence, if 10 grand of that is employer national insurance, 10 grand employee, 10 grand income tax, you get 30 grand. If all those taxes disappear, they're going to pay you the 60 grand. The employer is going to look at, in essence, what they're prepared to pay for employing you, and some of that will go in tax and some of it will come to you. Anything that reduces it, be it called employer, being called national insurance, anything that gets it is going to be coming back in your pocket one way or another. And that's, that it doesn't make sense to have a whole myriad of administration to get to that point, because actually that's just another cost that the employer can't pay you but does have to pay for employing you.
Indeed. Anything that disincentivizes people employing people is just a bad thing, really. And finally, the Taxpayers Alliance are on about raising the stamp duty threshold on properties up to £1 million, taking all property transactions below that out of the way of stamp duty. More of an issue down in London, and certainly central London, but I've always thought it was a bit of a cheek for the government to get some money when you're buying a house. Certainly, if you're buying it for for yourself, perhaps if you're buying it for an investment or what have you. But if you're buying it for yourself, I mean, certainly I've had to pay stamp duty and just purchasing a flat. So it's always seemed a bit of a cheat to me. So if they can get rid of that, that might reinvigorate the housing market, which of course has taken quite a slide with the COVID crisis. What's your views on that, Mike?
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, we need to make it easier for people to buy properties. I don't know what the average house in Croydon costs now. I'm going to guess about £350, or the average property, should I say? I'm going to guess maybe it's more than that. But if you've got to put down 10%, that's 35 grand. I'm not sure where national insurance stamp duty kicks in anymore. But anything that removes the stamp duty burden as well as another cost that people have to find has got to be a good thing. And yes, probably it should go in total, but I'm going to confess to not being too worried about people buying £1 million properties having to pay some stamp duty.
Well, moving on from taxing matters, obviously there's been some notorious protests of late, but there's some protests going on in Hong Kong at the moment. The suggestion is that China is going to introduce a national security law. Now, essentially, this all goes back to 1997 when the United Kingdom handed back Hong Kong to China, as they were duty bound to do under a previous treaty. But within the negotiations for handing Hong Kong over to China, there was a basic law was agreed, which is essentially a mini constitution, and it's that mini constitution which sets out that policy of one country but two systems. So back in 1997, Hong Kong was a land with free speech, lots and lots of personal freedoms, civil liberties, etc., and also a very capitalist economy. China, a lot less so. And whilst some reforms have taken place in China in terms of the economy, as we've seen over the past 20, nearly 25 years, not so much in the way of positive reforms in terms of civil liberties. And this national security law has really put the frighteners under the people in Hong Kong, because they believe that they're going to have their speech impeded. They're not going to be allowed to protest against anything. For example, at this time of year, often the Hong Kong people they take part in a vigil where they commemorate the Tiananmen Square massacre. That will obviously not be allowed if China has its way. Certainly, no such things take place in other parts of China. So, lots of concern there about what this is going to mean for the people of Hong Kong. As a result of which, the government is talking about basically providing visas to people from Hong Kong to potentially move over here. At the moment, there are about 3 million Hong Kong people who are eligible for what's called a British National Overseas Passport, which allows you basically 6 months worth of visa-free living in the UK. They're talking about expanding that to 12 months and allowing people to, if they come over here, to work. But furthermore, there's talk of allowing all Hong Kong residents who are eligible for this type of passports to come to the UK should they wish, and to provide them with a route to citizenship. Mike, some concerning activities going on in Hong Kong. What are your views on what's going on over there and the possible government response to it?
Well, it is very concerning. China, the Chinese Communist Party is an organization responsible for the biggest mass murder in all of human history. The Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, I think some of the Great Leap Forward would come into this, under Chairman Mao, murdered, and the figures vary, but 60 plus million people for the strive of the Communist Party and you know their idea of perfection. That party is still in power. That government is still there, and they are frankly terrifying. I also happen to think with their one-child policy, the single biggest infringement on human liberty in all of history that certainly I'm aware of, where hundreds of millions of women were denied the right to have 2 children. Appalling can you get? And these people should be treated as utter words I won't be using on this podcast. But the big thing that's changed in Hong Kong, of course, or in China, is that I seem to remember at the time that Hong Kong either was handed over or at least the negotiations took place, Hong Kong was something like 25% of China's GDP, even though it was tiny. It's now 2.7%, just Googling this here. I'm not sure whether that's on partial parity or whether that's in total value. But either way, Hong Kong's GDP as a share of China's overall GDP has shrunk, and China now feels it can take the risk of hurting Hong Kong or seeing an economic downturn in Hong Kong because it won't feel the economic impact. But there's kind of a wider problem there as well, is that China does feel that the Chinese are kind of, they have a responsibility over them and a right to interfere then, and they don't see a Han Chinese country as a separate country. They do not see Hong Kong as a separate country. They don't see Taiwan as a separate country, and that fact that they don't acknowledge the notion that Chinese people can live in their own separate countries away from the country of China is a very, very worrying thing it should be for frankly everyone in the world. We have a duty to Hong Kongers. We created this nation, and the way it was created is clearly problematic. But we gave them a sense of freedom. It was a liberal country, not a liberal democracy, but we gave them a chance to economically build, have a real sense of freedom, and then gave them away. And I think that's wrong. We didn't give them their independence. We gave them away, and we should have held some duty to the people there to actually give them a chance to come over here, or to go to other places. We shouldn't have just disbanded those 3 million people. And I think now we've got a duty to act towards it. I remember at the time of the referendum, we were doing some public meetings, and there was a Q&A at one, and I can't quite remember which one it was, but I remember mentioning the Yazidi people who not long before had been effectively had an act of, called it genocide, and there's sometimes some particular definitions of that, but ISIS had come in. Most of them had fled. The ones that hadn't fled, they'd killed the men, and basically they turned the women into sex slaves. I mean, it's a hideous thing. And I'd said in this public meeting, frankly, they're real asylum seekers. There's something we could have done and should have done to help them. People knew that ISIS were coming towards them. People knew that ISIS felt that these Yazidis, because they sort of have their own religion, were worse than, the lowest of lives, and that we knew what ISIS were going to do, so we could have done it. There was a bit of a pushback. People didn't think that it was really our responsibility to get involved in it. And I sort of feel this has always been a problem with mass immigration, that because people were so fed up with the uncontrolled nature of immigration, the fact that we were never asked about it, we didn't feel we had any control over it, that we wouldn't accept that here there's some real asylum seekers, we could have helped them, and we didn't. We've now taken back control, and wouldn't it be great if we use some of that control to say, well, I'll tell you what, we might pause some other immigration for a couple of years because we don't need endless number of people coming into this country. I don't think there's any support for an endless number of people coming into this country. But those people over there in Hong Kong, they actually need some help, and we've got a duty, and why don't we go and help them?
No, it's a very good point. I think we do have a responsibility. Whether we can literally take on 3 million people in one go is another matter. But I understand that the government is trying to build up an alliance with some countries such as America and Australia to try to coordinate an approach if in the event that there is an exodus of people from Hong Kong. So hopefully we'll be able to perhaps share the burden if that does come to pass. But certainly we do have, I do feel that we do have a responsibility to them. As I think you've rightly pointed out, given the growth in China's economy ever since Hong Kong rejoined China, as it were, in 1997, the Chinese government's perhaps not so concerned about the response of governments, or indeed, for that matter, of businesses who may be located in Hong Kong and have perhaps been located there way before China took it back over. They're perhaps a little less concerned about that now than they might have been 15, 20 years ago. So, yeah, I do think we have a responsibility, and it'll be an interesting time to see how this develops. I think our relationship with China and the West's, if you like, relationship with China over the next few years is going to be interesting as well. You've obviously got the Huawei matter. Let alone all that's happened with the COVID crisis, and what the origins of the disease are, and how it was dealt with in the early stages of it after it came into existence. So I think that relationship between the West and China is going to be particularly fraught, I think, over the coming years.
It Yes. You do raise a fair point. We're not practically. I don't know how you get 3 million people here. That sounds like an awful lot of aeroplanes. And we couldn't take 3 million people tomorrow if we tried. And building an alliance of democracies, because I hear Singapore is also preparing to take on people from Hong Kong if there's an outflow. I'm sure there will be other countries in the region that would. But building an alliance of democracies to do that would be a very, very positive thing to do for this end and more generally. We do need to combat what is an undemocratic, corrupt and corrupting state in China. And the more of a barrier, more of a buffer, and more experienced we get at working together to do that, the better.
Absolutely. Well, whilst all of this is going on, the Brexit negotiations continue. Don't seem to be going too well at the moment, but it's been an interesting change of tune from the Confederation of British Industry, I note. The CBI, once referred to during the referendum campaign as the voice of Brussels. Indeed, somebody from Croydon was involved in a particularly famous protest that I'm sure if you Google, you'll discover who that was and where it was. But Caroline Fairbairn, the Director General of the CBI, told Newsnight recently that the organisation now opposes an extension to the implementation period beyond the planned December 2020 date, and is arguing that businesses have the resilience to be able to plan for a no-deal Brexit, and they have no interest in delaying any further. Indeed, she was quoted as saying, "We have left the European Union politically, now we need to leave the European Union economically." Mike, they've changed their tune.
Haven't they? You can just imagine as well the people on Newsnight, just how angry they would be that they've gone to the EU-funded CBI and they've dared to have some truth spoken to them. Rather than the legal obligation that anyone that receives funds from the EU has to support the EU. Haven't they just? I suspect business has finally, or that the CBI, and you should always remember these organisations, the CBI isn't business. It's an organisation. It's its own organisation. It has its own views, and it takes some fees from businesses and it may or may not choose to represent them. Anyone that's been a member of a union will know sometimes the unions represent you and sometimes not so much. And that's all the CBI really is a union for big business and specifically for business. I imagine most big businesses have now implemented their no deal plans. They have all the systems in place. They have all the structure there. They're obviously carrying on as they are today, but they've got the template ready to feed in the moment we leave, and be it under a different deal or a no deal or whatever it might be, WTO terms. And they just want to get on with it. The uncertainty is causing them pain. Good that the CBI have finally caught up with that fact.
Indeed. The sinner has repented at last.
I wish I could remember the biblical quote about there is more joy in heaven for the son that returns than the ones, and we have it now from the CBI.
We do indeed. Well, obviously we're still somewhat locked down at the moment, and with this weather, we're certainly not going to be going out too much anyway, whether we're allowed to or not. But we've got a couple of interesting pieces on our website that have just gone up. Mike, why don't you tell the listeners about those?
Yes, so we've got a new article from an economic piece from Joss Ascoth. Thanks again to Joss for that. It's part of a larger collection of work he's hoping to put forward at some point soon, and he's talking about the central banks and fiat money and how they feel it's the root of cronyism. Lots of libertarian parties will have this view, or libertarians more generally, that central banks and fiat money are a major problem for us. The ability of the government to debase the currency at a whim means the governments are not restricted in terms of their fiscal spending. It means they can tax you by means other than being clear to you how they tax you. And it's really interesting just finding out a bit about the history of that and how it works. One of the stats I found quite interesting here. So the exchange rate of dollars to pounds for 100 years was dollars 486 divided by pounds 113 grains of gold. That's a bit hard as I read that out. But point being, it was fixed because the amount of gold in a dollar and the amount of gold in a pound sterling was the same. The exchange rate for the gold standard was simply a law of arithmetic. And I think that's just really interesting what he says there. Yeah, well worth having a read and see what he's saying there. Closer to home, Croydon Council has somewhat been taking us for granted. As part of the COVID crisis, all local authorities have been asked to pass out grants to small and medium businesses in their area to help them overcome the current problems. And there's a couple of grant funds depending on what type of business it is. Croydon Council have been doing that along with other councils. Except Croydon Council, as is so often the case, have been doing it in a pretty shambolic manner. Croydon Council has found itself in the bottom 10% of payments paid by both number and amount because the eligible businesses were identified. They've made only 77% of the payments identified to companies. That sounds pretty high, but the average is actually 84%, and 96 authorities have made over 90% of them. So Croydon is 290 out of 314 local authorities in Britain. Our council, that is spending money like a drunken sailor and has a terrible financial position, hasn't delivered Westfield, which the town centre redevelopment that it was so avidly tasked with doing, has made a mockery of the planning system in the borough, can't even pay out money that has been given to pay out. Really worrying. Worth having a read of that just to understand the problems at the council there. These are local businesses on your high street that might not be there because of the shambolic mismanagement of Croydon Council.
Excellent. Well, if you'd like to write for the website or have any stories you'd like us to cover, please do contact us via the Twitter @CroydonConst, via our Facebook page, via our website, croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or you can email us, croydonconstitutionalists@gmail.com. Well, thank you to Mike for being on the podcast today. I know it's such a struggle to get you these days because you're in such high demand with your media career with the Russians. They'll be making conspiracies up about you at the moment with your contacts with Sputnik.
I'm hoping they don't want someone happy because I don't feel like I've been like that today.
So listeners, do please subscribe to the podcast and the pubcast, and indeed our YouTube channel, where we hope soon to be free to do some more campaigning, and we'll put some more material on there. Do please like, share, and if you feel able, just leave a review. It's really helpful to get some feedback, and it helps other people to find the podcast. So once again, thank you to everyone for listening, and until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And before I go, I just want to tell you that in the same way, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner, the CBI, who repentance, than over 99 righteous people who don't need repentance. And it's goodbye from me.
Stay safe, everybody.